Hey everyone, Scott Michaels with Dearly Departed at your fingertips. I'm now at Hollywood Cemetery. It is Friday afternoon, and it's a safe distance from any living people anyway. So I figured I'd dig out an old movie that you'd be interested in seeing. If it were me, I would. So a couple of years ago, but most of you know my obsession with the Tate LaBianca murders. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Stephen Weiss. Now, Stephen Weiss was the 10-year-old boy who found the gun that was used at the Tate crime scene to kill Stephen Parent, Wojciech Frykowski, and Jay Sebring. And after the murders, Linda Kasabian or Tex Watson, depending on what account you read or believe, were traveling down Beverly Glen Boulevard and threw the gun out the window just randomly. And this gun landed in someone's backyard, Stephen Weiss's backyard. And on September 1st, he found it. Now, it's been represented a couple of different ways about how the gun was handled by the Los Angeles Police Department, or yeah, it would be the LAPD, even though it's the Valley. But Stephen Weiss is here to set the record straight, or was here to set the record straight about how the police handled the gun, what exactly happened, how it was represented in the film in 1976, Helter Skelter. And so this is Stephen Weiss himself, who met me in front of his house where the gun was actually found. And he was very kind to speak to us. So I hope you learned something from this. I hope that you like my videos. I hope that you'll subscribe and possibly sponsor by Patreon, only a couple of bucks a month, and I'll send you a thank you note in the real mail. So thanks very much, and stay sane and stay healthy. From Hollywood Cemetery.
3 weeks after the Tate and LaBianca murders, 9-year-old Stephen Quint is working with his father in their backyard.
Hey, Dad! Look what I found! Holding it this way so I mess up the fingerprints. I saw it on Dragnet.
My son's convinced this gun was involved in every major crime from the Black Dahlia to those Tate murders a few weeks ago.
We appreciate your calling, Mr. Quinn. Looks like it's been used to hammer something. Thank you.
Stephen Quint's discovery is tagged and filed in the property room of the Van Nuys Division of the Los Angeles Police Department.
2 months have passed since Shara Tate and 4 others were mercilessly slaughtered, and yet not one suspect is in custody. Not one piece of concrete evidence is presented to a frightened community that progress is being made.
That sounds like the gun Stevie found.
Had a broken grip, didn't it?
I must not be the one. When was it we gave it to the police?
It was over a month ago. Oh, surely they'd have come back to ask more questions by now.
And searched the hillside.
And will you explain how you ended up on the hillside? And
Sure.
Please.
Sure. So, this is the house where I grew up, and I think it was August of '69. I believe it was
The murders were
It was
August.
about 2 weeks after the murders. So, if you can see that hillside, by the house, that's my friends and I. That's where we used to. That was our playground. So we used to play on the hill. So, I was, and Beverly Glen is right there on top of the hillside right up there. You can kind of see maybe where the street is. So that's the path that the Manson girls used when they went from Cielo Drive to Spawn Ranch. And I think obviously what happened was, as they were driving down Beverly Glen, you know, when you're going, if you've ever driven, those of you who are locals, when you've ever driven down Beverly Glen,
We just literally just did that.
yeah, you don't really know that there's houses down here. So they obviously just chucked the gun out of the window, just thinking it was a canyon. And it ended up right smack in the middle of our hillside. So I found the gun about halfway up the hillside and brought it down to our backyard and brought it to my father, who called the LAPD. They sent the police officer out, who picked up the gun a few hours later and brought it to the Van Nuys division of the LAPD. And then, for those, I don't know, for those how much you know the story, but the LAPD lost the gun, or they didn't know they had the gun. And then I think it was about 3 months after the murders, my father was reading in the paper that they were looking around the world for the murder weapon. And they had no idea where it was. And they showed a picture of what that type of gun looked like. And he looked at the gun and said, "That's the murder weapon that my kid found." And he called LAPD, and LAPD said, well, it's been about 3 or 4 months. We probably don't have it anymore because after that length of time, any stuff like that we have laying around, we just throw in the ocean.
Oh.
And he couldn't believe it. So he called a friend of his who worked for the local CBS television affiliate here. And this reporter made some calls or went over to the Van Nuys police department and searched around in the basement, and they actually found it. They hadn't thrown it in the ocean. And a year later, I got subpoenaed and answered all of Bugliosi's questions, Manson's attorney, about finding the gun, and, you know, what it looked like and the condition of the gun. And that was our experience.
Was Manson in the courtroom?
He was about as far away as we are,
Wow.
maybe a little bit further, about 15, 20 feet.
And you were 10 when you were subpoenaed?
I think I was 10 when I found it and
Yeah.
11 when I testified.
We just literally watched the scene in Helter Skelter where they represented what you did.
Yeah.
And they said, you know, he says, I didn't put any fingerprints on it because I watched Dragnet. Is that?
Which was not true.
No.
I never watched the show. I hated the show. As I was telling Adrian the other day, I actually went out to the desert about 6 months earlier than before I found the gun with my father, who just took advantage of the opportunity to show me how to shoot his little .22 caliber gun and to hold it by the tip of the barrel, just for safety. And I think he did that because he kept the gun in the house and just didn't want me to hurt myself. So I just did what he told me. You know, I wasn't thinking about fingerprints or anything like that. It wasn't that blunt. I just carefully brought it down by the tip of the barrel, and I set it down on the table, and just because that's the way he told me how to handle a gun. And I could see,
funny.
I knew it wasn't, I mean, every one of these houses was kids. We had junk all over these hills, you know, toys everywhere. I knew immediately. In fact, I hadn't thought about this in 49 years. I remember when I looked at it, I knew immediately. I said to myself, I picked up oh man, this isn't a toy. Because there were toys everywhere. And brought it back down.
Did you ever, like, in your gut, think that it might have been involved with the murders? You know, the murders? I mean, before it all came about.
I don't think
that it
either
was.
my father or I had any idea what it was.
Yeah.
We just, you know, we wouldn't have made that kind of connection at that point.
Because, I mean, it was so close, you know, in proximity. It just, you know, it just so close.
You know, I'll have to ask my father. He's 86 now.
That's awesome.
Wow.
I'll have to ask him if he knew immediately that it might have been involved in some kind of crime. It's a good question. I've never really asked him that. It's possible.
And when the movie came out, obviously, were you what did they film it here? I don't even know. Did they shoot it here?
They shot it here.
Yeah.
In fact, interestingly, the guy who lived in not this house, but and not that one, but the next one down, was an actor. He was a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and his son was about my age. I think they made the movie about 6 or 7 years after it occurred, after I found it. So I was too old to play myself. So that guy who was an actor had a son who was 10 years old. So they played us. Yeah.
That's great.
Were you present when they came by and picked the gun up?
Yes.
With your father, you actually were there
Yes.
when they
We
handed
were
it over?
both here. Yeah. And unfortunately, the police officer who picked it up was a rookie police officer. It was his first year. I think his name was Watson. And this police officer Watson came, and I guess because he was an experiencer like us, he never made he didn't make the connection. He didn't when he first picked it up. Probably the last thing on his mind was, uh-oh, this might have been involved in one of the most heinous crimes ever. And he just didn't make that connection. So he put his fingers all over it and emptied the chambers, and fingerprints were the last thing on his mind too.
Yeah, well, this is just one of many. We were just talking about how, they had there's so much more evidence they just had. And it wasn't until that Atkins article came out in December that everyone sort of put the 2 and 2 and 3 and 3 together to make sense of it all. But the report, the movie represents it that your dad and your mom were watching television and they saw it on the news. And I've always read that they read about it in the paper and said, she threw the clothes and the guns out the window, and they said, hang on, Stephen found a gun right about that time.
Yeah.
So it was all because of a confession that was published in December that everything sort of got put together.
Right. Yeah, that wasn't quite true. I remember him looking at the evening newspaper and looking at the picture of what they knew the gun to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he made the connection.
And they hung up on him. Or no, they told him that he was crazy and then we're going to the bottom of the ocean. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And the only people, as I understood it, the only people that didn't get that illustration were the people that actually had the gun. I don't know. Yeah. It makes no sense. But there was a $25,000 reward, and you were to be given $1,000, and the other 24 for Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham.
Yeah.
And so what did you do with the money?
Yeah. Well, did any of you read Helter Skelter, Bugliosi's book? Yeah. Well, I'm not sure how they discussed how the money was divvied up. I know Susanette and Selmay probably got some portion of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The money was put up by Roman Polanski, who was married at the time to Sharon Tate, and his good friend Warren Beatty. And I thought they had each put up 25. I thought the total was 50, but I might be mistaken. But some amount was designated for me. I think it was 1,000, but I never saw it.
Oh.
I never saw the money. I think, I'm not sure. At the time, if you remember, Roman Polanski had to leave the country.
Yes.
You remember some of the problems he was involved in? Yeah. And I think I ran into Bugliosi about 15, 20 years ago in Las Vegas, and we were chatting, and he asked me how I'd been. I asked him how I'd been. I said, by the way, you wrote in Helter Skelter, I got $1,000. I'm still waiting for the check in the mail. And it's first he'd ever heard of it. He couldn't believe it. He said, I'm really sorry to hear that because I wrote that in the book. So.
That's funny. I know Virginia Graham pretty well, and she definitely got the 12. And then Ronnie Howard, she was killed about 10 years later, but she was still kind of a crooked individual. Virginia's still around. She's still in.
So they all got their money? So I'm the only one who got screwed?
Yeah, she moved to Hawaii with hers. But if you wouldn't mind asking your dad, God, that would be so interesting to find out. Yeah. I think it's and congratulations, your dad's still here. Mine is 89 now, and it's a pleasure to have him.
Adrian asked me the other night at dinner an interesting question that I hadn't really thought about in 49 years that you might find interesting. She asked me what I was feeling or what I thought when I looked over at Manson and the girls while I was testifying. Because it was you look back, you think these things are grander than life. Some massive courtroom. The courtroom was probably no bigger than this driveway, and it really wasn't that big. It was very intimate. It wasn't that large of a criminal courtroom, and so everybody was very close together. So I remember when I was on the stand, looking over at Manson and the three girls. I think Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel. Am I missing one?
Van Houten.
And Leslie Van Houten.
Yeah.
So there were 4 girls and Manson. They were all sitting fairly close together, and I wasn't scared. I wasn't nervous. I remember I was just kind of like surprised because I was, as I'd mentioned to Adrian, I had testified right after the county coroner. So I listened to this just gruesome testimony. They should have never brought me into the courtroom, but I listened to this gruesome testimony. And then during the oath, I looked at these just graphic crime scene photos. And then I took the stand. So I had all this going on in my mind. And I remember looking over at Manson, who was about this tall, and these 4 women who were relatively attractive. I mean, you know, they were pretty girls. And they were not huge women. And I remember thinking, how could they have done this? How could they have done that? You know, it's just, you would have all had that same feeling looking at it. First of all, how are they big enough or strong enough to do it? And then how could these women who look so sweet have done something such as heinous? That was really all that was going through my mind. That was testimony.
Wow. Did they use those photos? Did you have to look at those photos?
Oh no, they didn't show me the photos.
Okay.
When I was stand. No.
What a crazy little piece of history you're involved with. That is, I mean, you can dine out on that story for the rest of your life, right? It's awesome. Well, I mean, it's so kind of you to take a little bit of
My
time
pleasure.
with us.
Thank you.
You're having a nice tour.
As nice as this
What's
is,
next?
right?
What's next on the tour?
We're gonna go to Laurel Canyon, old Mama Cass's old house where they all used to hang out, where
Yeah.
Manson hung out, and etc. So, yeah, because I don't know. Do you follow this? Like, do you read the new books that come out and stuff like that about this, or?
Some of them.
Okay.
You know, I read Helter Skelter, and
Yeah.
I've actually, truthfully, only been interviewed once about the whole thing. Frankly, my wife kind of, the whole thing is so just gruesome to her that she'd prefer that, you know, we don't make a big issue out of it.
Yeah.
You know, but I had given one interview about it in 2001, and this is the second.
That's, I have a friend that owns the car that they used on both those nights. He's afraid to tell anybody he has it. It's just because, it's got such a stigma to it. Obviously, there's a group of people here every week driving down this street. It's still an attraction for a lot of people. This is such a bizarre story.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's never going to go away. It's too steeped in LA. Do you remember like when the murders happened? Because that's when people had to lock their doors and windows. I mean, you must remember that happened. Before you even knew that you were involved with it. I mean, the fear in people.
Well, times were different back then. The LA Times and the LA Herald Examiner and a lot of other papers around the country printed our home address that night and the next day. So it was everywhere. And there were a lot of cars, a lot of looky-loos that came up the street for a few days. And I know it freaked my parents out.
I can imagine. Yeah, that kind of notoriety. And I Bugliosi published all those addresses. That's how, I went over the book with a highlighter because I was interested in seeing these things for myself. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that would have been odd but nobody even thought for a moment there were stalkers back then, or, that wasn't even in our psyche yet.
I didn't realize it until maybe 10, 15 years ago. I was reading something somewhere. I didn't really appreciate who Sharon Tate was, but she was like a big time actress in 1969. She was like, like Sandra Bullock or any real popular actress today, so, and there were a lot of other Hollywood celebrities who were murdered at the crime scene. So, this wasn't a crime that took place in South Central or Pacoima. This was Hollywood, and this was like, imagine Angelina Jolie was murdered and, a bunch of her friends in Beverly Hills. People were keeping their doors locked, and Hollywood was keeping Beverly Hills, the West Side. They didn't know what was going on. How long was it until they captured?
Well, it was after December.
Yeah, it was at least 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
The city was kind of on edge.
Yeah, before anyone was charged, it was December.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially since it happened right up the road to you, yeah, that must have been ultra creepy for, because it really did a number on people's heads.
The whole thing's creepy.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that it was over the hill, and you drove past Cielo Drive probably 1,000 times, that, I grew up in Detroit, and I remember thinking that Nancy was going to come crawling up the side of my house, with his creepy eyes and crawl on my windows. I mean, that was how scary they made him out to be. So, being right in the thick of it, I can't imagine. That would scare me to death.
I looked at him a couple of times while I was testifying, and he is not he's not an imposing figure. You know, he's relatively small. He had this swastika cut into his forehead. He looked like the devil, but he smiled during my whole testimony. I think it was just like comic relief for him to have a 10-year-old on the stand versus all these cops and detectives and stuff. So he never gave me the devil eyes that he gave a lot of witnesses to try to intimidate him. But he just had this, he was evil. You could see it in him. He was just pure evil. You could see it in his eyes. You could feel it. It's hard to describe. You know?
You stepped up to it.
It's probably good that I was just 10 years old. You know?
Were you treated differently in school?
That's what I was just gonna ask.
Yeah.
We're like you the cool kids.
I have like a 6th grader, and I can only imagine.
You know,
6th grader.
you know,
Parents treat you differently?
It didn't last long.
No.
Yeah, I think I was. It was pretty cool. The coolest thing was school started a week later, and like everybody did their current event on that. So that was kind of cool. But my parents did a really good job of bringing me back down to earth really fast, and that was that. So.
Were your other friends jealous that you were the one that found it and not them?
I don't.
I'd be jealous if you. I totally would.
Years later, you'd be, but you know, when it
that's
happened,
right.
you probably didn't realize it. Yeah.
I don't think so.
No.
It was. Yeah. It was out of the news. You know.
Yeah.
A week later, they were on to something else.
Yeah, we were spoiled for choice then. What a freak show it was. The whole thing.
Yeah. Imagine today, with social media and you know, and 24/7 news probably would have been a little different story.
Yeah, I mean, the true crime is taken to a different level now too. You know, now there probably has to be 50 to 100 books on the case now, so easily.
Yeah.
And magazines, it's an industry.
That's what's the most amazing thing to me. I was telling somebody recently, my wife took me on a cruise, and there were a few sea days that were so boring. There was nothing to do on the boat, and they had like these guest speakers. If any of you ever been on a cruise, you know they have like guest speakers talk about different things. They had one of the district attorneys who had worked with Bugliosi, who's now in his 80s, talking about the Manson case.
No kidding.
And it was like 10 o'clock in the morning in the Grand Theater, and I thought, this will be interesting. You know, I had nothing else to do on this. So I walked into the theater with my reluctant wife, and it was packed. There were like 2,000 seats. It was packed, and I was just amazed. Like, this is 50 years ago. And enough. You know, and it was packed. Which it's just there's something about it. The whole story.
Well, it's movie stars, it's rock stars, but also, I was telling these guys earlier, it's like after this moment, you thought you were safe in your own home, in your own bed, and you weren't anymore after this. You know, Abigail Folger was reading a book in bed. And the end, you know, happened 30 minutes later on the front lawn.
And then the very next day you had the La Biancas,
Yeah.
who were a very wealthy, prominent family in the city.
Yeah.
I think he owned a bunch of supermarkets. And everyone thought, oh man, what's next? Who's next? You know?
Yeah.
Luckily it was nobody.
Yeah, well, there were so many different things that happened back then. They were trying to pin it on. You know, there was, I think they thought Brian Jones might have been part of it too. Well, when he died in '69, and then one of the Lennon sisters, you know, was being stalked, and her stalker killed her father, and they thought that might be part of it because it was so bizarre, and it was show business, and that's what this was. But anyway, I don't want to keep you anymore.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to talk to you.